introduce Daniela. We had a lovely dinner, and so she is now going to I get to sit back and relax, and now she has to work. What a shame. So Daniela is the state botanist and the Endangered Plant Division manager. So we're going to get to learn about a lot of things that you don't normally get to see when you're out in the mountains because they're here, they're gone, and you missed them. All right? And she's with the New Mexico State Forestry Division. Welcome, Daniela.
Thanks. Hi all, and thanks for coming, and thanks for your interest in the rare plants of New Mexico and the rare plant program. And I just want to say a little bit about my background. I've been the rare plant program manager for the last 2.5 years in New Mexico. And before that, I was working for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on rare plant issues, endangered plant issues in southern Utah and in central Utah. And before that, I was working for 12 years for the Navajo Nation as their rare plant botanist for the Natural Heritage Program. So I've had really the great fortune of strictly working with rare plants my entire career, and strictly working with rare plants in the Southwest. And not all states have rare plant programs. Most of the time there's somebody keeping track of the rare plants, and that's typically a heritage program, but they not always have botanists. The Navajo Nation had a heritage program, which is basically a database that brings in and manages and stores all the rare plant and animal information and maps it for a given state, or in this case it was the Navajo Nation. New Mexico has a heritage program, which is in charge of their rare plants, but again, they don't have a botanist. So in New Mexico, the Endangered Plant Program is run through the State Forestry Division, which is a bit of an obscure place for an endangered plant program because all the rest of forestry works with trees. And it turns out that we don't have any endangered trees in New Mexico. But in New Mexico, it is the Forestry Division that has the statutory authority over the rare plant or endangered plant law. New Mexico actually has an endangered plant law, which is a very weak law, and basically just protects endangered plants from collection or transplanting. So the program gives out permits for endangered species, for the taking of endangered species, just for the scientific or conservation purposes. But that's basically what the law says. It doesn't protect rare and endangered plants from anything else but collecting.
So if we, as Native Plant Society, wanted to propagate some of the endangered species, would we be allowed to collect some?
You would have to get a permit from me.
You'd have to get a permit.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's what the law says.
Okay, that's cool though. I'm glad we can do that.
But you can plow them under, and there's no law against that.
Oh, that's not so good. That doesn't make me happy.
It's a law that is, I think, just on the books to give us the opportunity to get federal funding to fund the programs through Section 6 of the Endangered Species Act, which requires there to be a state law. But it also directs the division, the Forestry Division, to investigate all plant species of New Mexico to establish an endangered species list. Now that's 4,000 species in the state that I'm supposed to investigate to see if they're endangered or not. So that's quite a tall order for one person. Currently we have 37 plant species on that list that we consider endangered in the state of New Mexico. And but that is really just the tip of the iceberg. So those 37 plant species are plants that have some kind of a threat, a documented threat, which caused them to end up on that list, and it includes 13 federally listed species. So you can find the state law and all the plants that are listed in the state of New Mexico at this top on our website, the top. And it also includes a lot of the reports that come out of the State Forestry Division on the work we do with our endangered plants. But like I said, that's just the tip of the iceberg. There is a a group of botanists in New Mexico. It's called the Rare Plant Technical Council. They get together once a year and establish a list of anything that's considered rare in New Mexico, and that's currently about 200 plant species. All of those can be found at the second website here on the New Mexico Rare Plants, and that includes photographs of all of those plants, of the plants and the habitat, as well as a species description and some general references. That's a really good website for reference on rare plants of New Mexico.
Do all UNM colleges work with you on that rare plants, or is it just one campus that is putting that together? Or do all the campuses contribute?
You mean in New Mexico? No, it's really just through the herbarium at UNM.
Okay.
Oops.
Oops.
So these are some of the projects that the Rare Plant Program has done in the past and that we're currently working on. A lot of our work is status surveys and reports on sensitive proposed candidate and listed species. The program is primarily funded by a grant from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service under Section 6 of the Endangered Species Act. So there's a heavy focus on listed plants, but also on plants that might be moving into that direction because of some threat. So I go out a lot and try to relocate known sites because a lot of our information on rare plants is very historic. So I try to find the known locations, see if the plants are still there, see if there's a threat, and find the true abundance and distribution of a species. We have a lot of, well, not a lot, several very rare plants that we monitor, meaning we go back to the same site every year to see how the plants are doing, how many plants are there, are they flowering, are they in good condition, are they stable, or are they in decline, or are they increasing? Then at times we are writing recovery plans for federally listed species and 5-year reviews. Those are specific to the Fish and Wildlife Service. A recovery plan, if you don't know, is a guidance document that gives us direction on what needs to be done to get a species delisted or off the federal endangered species list. All federally listed species are supposed to get a 5-year review, meaning their status has to be updated every 5 years to find out if there's any new information known. And that's the way the Fish and Wildlife Service is supposed to document how the species are doing. And then we coordinate with the Fish and Wildlife Service to carry out some of these recovery actions that need to be done before species can be delisted. For example, we're working currently with the city of Santa Rosa to protect a location or 20-acre wetland for the Pecos sunflower, which is a federally listed plant. And this is the last puzzle in the piece. This is the last piece of land that needs to be protected for the plant before we can move towards delisting. And then there's a lot of species we really don't know anything about. In New Mexico, there's really still quite a few new species being described every year. This year I was working with one that was described from the Sandia crest recently, Ibis bladderpot. It was described in 2012, and the original species description said this plant is only known from 2 locations on the Sandia crest. One is in the parking lot, and one is along a trail. This should be listed. So that kind of stirs up a lot of headaches for the Forest Service in this case. Because the populations, the known populations, are perceived to be threatened by trampling or people driving over them. So I did a project actually wandering around, across the entire crest, trying to find out how abundant that plant is and where else it occurs. And I found it all over the place, so it's okay. But so that's the kind of work I do. I do educational projects, such as giving presentations to the Native Plant Society or schools or the garden clubs, or just handing out brochures at the fair. course, we maintain and update the endangered species list for the state. And I do a lot of reviews on projects that could potentially impact listed species for a variety of projects, anything from mining to power lines and water lines or anything that comes through my office. I provide management recommendations on how to deal with rare plants if a land manager does have it on their land. And of course, I also issue a collection and transplant
What is
permits.
that plant?
This is a sedum, the sedum integrifolium variety Neo-Mexicanum. It's endemic to the Sacramento Mountains.
Really pretty.
Yeah.
And did you take all these pictures, Daniela?
Yes, I did.
You did?
Yes, I did.
She's a very good photographer. That's pretty.
I took that one too, most recently. That is a cool picture.
Really nice.
This is the Pecos sunflower, which is on that site that I'm working on with the city of Santa Rosa. And I got a grant from the Fish and Wildlife Service to help take out all those Russian olives from the site to improve the habitat for it. And it was just very happy this year, and we hope it's going to be even happier once we've taken out the Russian olives.
So how many did you take out of there?
The Russian olives?
Yeah.
Oh, the mountains.
Mountains of them?
Yeah, it was really remarkable how many Russian olives were in there. And it's going to take a couple of years to keep them down.
And so do you pull them out?
We cut them off, and then we just stump treated them with an herbicide.
Wow.
And then we're working with prison crews. State Forestry runs with prison crews. We ran prison crews out there, and we had them step very gingerly. Yes. So these are some, basically the projects that I was working on this year and last year, and I'm going to talk about some of those in more detail, but these are my current projects. Recurring ones are, I'm working on annual monitoring of the Knowlton's cactus. I'm going to talk about that one a little bit more. That's one of the rarest plants in New Mexico, which is closely followed by the Holy Ghost Ipomopsis, which almost burned last year in the Tres Lagunas fires up north of Pecos. Those are the two most rare plants in New Mexico. And then Mesa Verde cactus and Mancos milkvetch, another couple of federally listed plant species up in the Four Corners area. We have some monitoring sites for those. Let's say just east of Shiprock on the east side of the reservation boundary. And we've been monitoring those plants infrequently every 5 years or so, and we did one of those this year, just to see if they're still there. A lot of our rare plants have serious issues. I think they're mostly drought related, and we see a lot of decline. The biggest projects that I've been working on for the last 2 years were post-fire assessments of rare and endemic plants that occur in those big fires that we had recently in the south, in the Gila National Forest, the Whitewater Baldy and the Silver Fire in 2012 and 2013, as well as the Little Bear in the White Mountains. And I'm also working on setting up post-fire monitoring plots for a federally listed cactus, the least pincushion cactus at Carlsbad Caverns, which has seriously burned in the last couple of years as well. And then I just talked about the ivy splatterpot and the status report that I did for that one up on the Sandia Crest. I'm working, the rhizome fleabane is an erigeron or a fleabane that is also federally listed, and it was listed because it was threatened by uranium mining. But nobody's looked at our population since 2004, and the Forest Service is looking to withdraw some land from mining to protect this plant so it can be delisted, but they needed to know what the current status is, so I worked on that this summer. And then the Pecos sunflower recovery project in Santa Rosa, and I'm currently still working on a project to survey the abundance and distribution of 4 gypsum endemics in the White Mesa area, northwest of Albuquerque. And like I said, I'm going to talk about a select number of these species, because I can't talk about all of them. And here's the Holy Ghost Ipomopsis. So this is the poster child of New Mexico rare plants. If you know any of our rare plants, then you might have heard of the Holy Ghost Ipomopsis, which only occurs in Holy Ghost Canyon in the Sangre de Cristo.
So that's by Santa Fe, am I right? North?
Northeast of there, north of Pecos. North of
Didn't get hurt in
Pecos.
fire.
It did not get hurt by the fire. So this plant is only known from a 1.5 mile stretch along the road in Holy Ghost Canyon. It does go maybe 200 feet up the slope, but it does not go any further than that. So that's just extremely rare. It's a very puzzling plant to me because it is a road cut, which is a disturbed site. And it's so very limited, and it has never been found anywhere else, and a lot of people have looked for it. So there's nothing distinct really about the habitat that couldn't be found elsewhere in that forest. So it was listed endangered in 1994 because of its extremely limited distribution, and because it's right next to a road and has a really high potential for disturbance. So it's been monitored by forestry, meaning we have some transects out there along which we count the number of plants every year. We've done that since 2003, I think. And then we also have 3 introduction sites, meaning we grew out plants in the greenhouse and try to establish new populations in similar habitats in the area to make sure that if something happens to this population, we have another population elsewhere. And we also do have a treatment plot. We think the plant is disturbance adapted. Some people think that it might need fire to regenerate, but there's plenty of disturbance out there, and there have been fires out there, and the plant just hasn't been found anywhere else. So, but we simulated a disturbance by cutting out all the big trees from an area and planted a bunch of seedlings in there, and then had a control just to see if they may be doing better in an area that's been disturbed. But that project is only a couple years old, and we're still looking into that. And so we write a status update on the species every year. And yes, the fire burned into Holy Ghost Canyon. It came all the way down one side from the south. The plants only grow on the north side of the street. So there's Holy Ghost Canyon, a creek flows through it, and then there's the road. There's the plants on this side, and the fire came all the way down to the creek. In this case, we weren't so much worried about the fire, but about the impacts of firefighting and post-fire, because where do they build their fire breaks? Along the roads and along the creeks. Mm-hmm. So we worked very hard with the firefighters, and the firefighters were briefed every night on the location of the plants. I went out there and I flagged off all the known populations along the roads so they would know to stay out of that area. And they did a really, really good job staying out.
How nice.
Yeah.
That's good.
Almost too good, because we kind of were hoping that maybe a little bit could burn just to see if it would do better, but not a plant was touched.
Have you been successful in propagating them in the greenhouse?
Yes, so we have established a successful protocol to germinate and grow them out in the greenhouse. It's a biennial or a perennial. So it usually goes into a rosette, and then it flowers, and then it dies. But let me go to the next slide.
Is it always that pink? I thought other pictures I'd seen it was much paler.
It's definitely very pink.
No, all the pictures I've ever seen is hot pink,
Yeah.
which is why I want one. I like pink.
There's enough pink flowers out there.
I like pink.
So this is an example of the data we collect. So this comes from the type locality, from the naturally occurring population, and you can see even with relatively long-term monitoring, 10 years is really not that much to really say anything about trend. So the plants were highest in 2006, which follows a fairly wet year in 2005, meaning that a bunch of plants germinated maybe in 2005, and then between 2005 and 2006, and that's why you have so many rosettes. Those are first-year plants. And then you see pretty good decline there through 2012, and they came up a little bit in 2013. And I don't have any 2014 data yet, or I have it, but I haven't processed it yet. But I think they went up again.
So you have lots of flowers, and then you have 2 years later lots of rosettes, but you don't have the big spike in the number of flowers that follows that, do you? I mean, you said that they rosette one year and flower the next?
Yes.
Interesting.
So, not all rosettes make it
Right.
from one year to the next, and but there's always more rosettes than there's flowering plants.
Okay.
And this is data from our transplant sites. We have 3 transplant sites: Panchuela, Windsor, and Indian Creek. Those really high numbers here at the beginning in 2006 and 2007 is the plants that we planted out. So we planted between 300 and 400 plants at these 3 sites. The first year, the reason why you see rosettes and adults there is because the first planting was done in 2005, that's only rosettes. Then they were looked after for the first time in 2006, but we also planted more plants. After that, we only counted the adults because there is a similar looking common Ipomopsis out there, the scarlet gilia or skyrocket, and you can't tell one from the other if you only have rosettes. So thereafter, we've only counted adults, and you can tell that, of course, we planted the adults, they flowered, and the next year, as expected, you would hardly find any adults because there were no rosettes in 2007. So at this point, the population has to establish itself and produce enough seeds to maintain a population on its own, because we no longer supplement it. So for the first 2 years, it looked pretty dire, and then in 2010, things started to come in a little bit, but look, it's like, 25 plants at the most at any one side, and it went up a little bit, but you can tell if any of them would make it, maybe this one, the one at Indian Creek. I was surprised to even see more plants in 2013 than in 2012 at Panchuela. That's just very, very few plants, and just hang on. But you can see how long a time it takes to even establish a new population of rare plants, even if it's annual or biannual.
In the relocation, were they able to be watered supplementally?
No, so they did water at one point shortly after they planted them. The survival tends to be actually really good. You transplant them in the summer during the monsoon season. That's why you can see there's still so many plants in 2006 and 2007. The ones that we planted out did really well, but then they apparently don't really produce enough seeds to really come back vigorously. One thing that we're learning from our experiments trying to establish new populations of rare plants is that it takes a very large quantity of seeds to get plants to maintain themselves.
And is Indian Creek more of the environment that Holy Ghost Canyon is? Because I'm looking, and Indian Creek consistently seems to be holding its own and doing pretty well. Is the environment there closer to Holy Ghost Canyon?
It's not close, necessarily closer, but I think it's wetter. It's shadier.
Okay.
It's shady.
It's shadier than the other ones. And the other two are a little bit more on a little more exposure, not that kind of shade and canopy cover. The other two were also, again, chosen because they thought it needed some level of exposure and disturbance. But really, we know very little about these things. And there is New Mexico's favorite cactus, right? This is tiny, tiny. This is a Pediocactus, Bolton's cactus in English, Pediocactus knowltonii. The genus Pediocactus, there's, I think, 9 recognized species of Pediocactus. 7 of them are federally listed under the Endangered Species Act. It's a group of cacti that is doing very poorly anywhere. And so I actually have had the pleasure to work with 6 of our endangered Pediocacti, but this is the rarest among them all. It only occurs on one hillside that's about 10 hectares big up in the Navajo Lake area on the border with Colorado. It is not known from anywhere else, has never been found anywhere else. And on that little hill, we have 1,000 plants.
Jeez.
It is,
Not spreading.
well, I'm guessing it must have been once a little bit more common than that. It's mysterious to me why it is only on that hill. I mean, yes, it's only the size of a quarter and very difficult to find, especially if it doesn't flower. But people have looked for that, and the hill doesn't really seem to have anything all that special about it either. There's plenty of hills like that.
Flowers, if the plant's a quarter,
The flowers are almost a quarter.
almost a quarter.
Yeah, they can completely obscure a plant if it's small.
Wow.
Yeah. So, again, for this one, we do annual monitoring, and we have 3 populations that we're trying to introduce in other areas with similar habitat nearby, so within 5 miles or so. We have plants that we basically cloned, that we took cuttings from the type locality, from the existing population, and we cured them and we grew them out in the greenhouse and had them establish roots, and then we took them out and planted them in the wild, and are monitoring those to see if they can maintain themselves over the years. But this is a very long-lived cactus. We have plants that have been tracking for 30 years, the same cactus. And so,
What kind of ground are they growing in? I see twigs from trees, so there must be trees around.
yes, it's in pinyon, juniper, and it's kind of a gravelly, reddish, sandy soil.
Huh.
And so this is our almost 30 years data. So we've been following the same cacti around for 30 years. And overall, I think the species is in slow decline, which is true for all of the other Pediocacti, I think, that are being monitored in the US, which is the only place where it occurs. But so in the last couple of years, it's a little bit of an upgrade, but I don't think it's very significant. I think that Pediocacti have issues with reproduction. I don't think they lose more plants than they recruit back into the population. So it could be some inbreeding issue, that they don't produce enough viable seeds, or that seed predation is really high, or a combination of all of the above, together with climate change and prolonged droughts, I think. So I think and again, going back to trying to establish new populations, we had some that we took from cuttings, and we also had some that we planted from seeds. And we did one trial with only a couple of hundred seeds, and that was a complete failure. There was just not enough plants that germinated and established themselves to maintain a population. So in 1993, we planted about, I think, 2,500 seed into this grid, this metal grid, so we could keep track where we planted our seeds and then see what came up. And then 1 year later, from these 2,500 seeds, we had 10 plants coming up. But then the following years, and that might indicate they might have to sit in the seed bank for a while, we had what looks like almost 80 seedlings coming up. And since then, we had a steady recruitment, except for 1998. I think that was actually survey error. Sometimes if you have a new person coming along, trying to find seedlings the size of a pinhead can be very challenging.
Mm-hmm.
But actually that population, plants keep coming up from the seed bank up until now, and I think a lot of those seeds actually still come up from the original seed bank in addition to the new ones, because we don't see that kind of recruitment in our transplant plots or in our or in our naturally occurring plots. And we had three locations where we transplanted plants or cloned them. I planted them out, about 150 plants in 1986, and in another plot in 1991, and then a third plot in 1995 with about 100 plants. And you can see a steady decline over the years, and then whatever that hiccup was, it could be once again that same person that did the data that year. They're very difficult to find. And then 2 of those populations crashed in 2006 because they were eaten by rodents. So we ended up with eaten by rodents. So especially during drought years sometimes, wood rats, kangaroo rats, and prairie dogs I've seen eating cacti. So we had to abandon those 2 sites. That was no longer enough cacti, but the third site keeps hanging on, but again, it's not very many plants, but we keep going back to that one every year and assess their condition.
Is there any suspicion of poaching? Are these on hiking trails or near or easy to find?
This is a secret site, but it is known, since it's the only site, is known to cactus collectors. Cactus collection is considered a very big threat to rare cacti. As a matter of fact, this site, before it was listed in the 60s, so before the Endangered Species Act, the cactus collectors knew about this population, they knew about its rarity. Somehow rumors went out that this was going to be flooded through the dam at Navajo Lake, and the cactus collectors went out and they took every single plant they could find.
Oh.
Yeah. And so the plants that are now on this site are the ones that probably came back from the seed bank from that poaching, but they took all of the plants. I think and that kind of thing gives them collectors a bad reputation. A lot of our rare cacti are now in the trade, so you can actually buy plants or seeds from nurseries. And a lot of collectors get their plants nowadays through nurseries or seeds that you can get on the internet, but there's still people that really romanticize collecting in the wild and getting them from the wild and from a certain area. There's a certain mystique associated with it. And at one point, we now have 10 monitoring plots. Originally, we had 11 monitoring plots. Somebody went on the site, found monitoring plot number 11, and took every single cactus. So
What happens if you catch someone doing that?
that is, you have to actually catch somebody doing that to get them even prosecuted. Because if you catch them and they have the plants, they can just say they came from private land, maybe not in this case, and they're not protected on private
Okay, so we
land.
need cameras and security.
So you have to literally have cameras on them, but all these things go in such remote places that your chances for catching somebody is almost zero. I mean, to this side, they get a once-a-year visit from the state botanist, and other than that, anybody could come by. And this is the last slide with a graph. After that, we only have
Then we
pretty
have
pictures.
pictures,
Okay.
yay.
But I just wanted to show you guys that we do other things than just look at flowers. So this is the size class distribution of a population, and this is how we measure the success of a transplant or the trend of a transplanted population or the seed plots against the type locality. So this is your normal, perhaps your normal size class distribution, the black blocks here, in a natural population, which means you just have maybe about 13 to 15% of recruits coming in every year. So those are your seedlings, they're under a centimeter. So about a half an inch at the most, that's what we consider seedlings or new recruits. The older plants get, the more they have a potential to become multi-stemmed from disturbances. That could be anything from a researcher stepping on them, God forbid, or mud covering it, or a deer stepping on them. Then oftentimes they sprout multiple heads. So old populations oftentimes have a pretty large distribution for multi-stemmed plants. And then the majority of plants, again, are under, well under an inch in diameter. And just what I want to point out here, the transplant, the blue blocks here, you can see that they have relatively, so this is 1 year worth of data, they have relatively a little recruitment and a large population of multi-stemmed plants versus the seed plots. They have very few multi-stemmed heads because it's a fairly young population, relatively young population. But that particular year, the seed plots didn't have a whole lot of seedlings.
Do they get eaten by larger animals or just the small animals?
Really only the smaller animals, because they're so small, the plants themselves, that a cow can't really wrap its mouth around it. It wouldn't be anything attractive to them.
Yes.
So that the site where the plant occurs, the cactus occurs, was bought by the Nature Conservancy, and it's completely fenced in and protected now. So this has been my pet project for the last 2 years. A couple of years ago, when the Little Bear Fire burned in the White Mountains, it came to my attention that there was one plant, one whole species within the fire perimeter that completely burned, and that kind of brought my attention to highly endemic plants in wildfires, because we've had so many wildfires in the last few years, and especially in the last 10 years, and so I did some research to see what people knew about these rare plants and their response to wildfires, and I found that nobody knows anything. Nobody's ever gone back after wildfire and look if these plants are still there. So, and I have a degree in fire ecology, so I'm kind of intrigued by fire anyways, and what happens after these fires and what comes back in and where. So I got a 2-year grant from the Fish and Wildlife Service to look at endemic species in the Gila National Forest, in the Lincoln National Forest, and at Carlsbad Caverns National Park. And my initial objectives for the project was just to see if the plants even come back after a fire. So my plan was to come back within the first year to see if the plants are still there. And then also see if there's any differences between varying levels of fire severity. You know, are they coming back in the intensely burned areas or not, or are they only coming back in the lightly burned areas? So those were some questions that came up. but also to collect baseline information on how these plants fare over time, because if we have these big, huge fires, the habitat of a lot of these plants gets severely altered. Some plants grow just on rock outcrops, and their habitat might not change very much, but a lot of them also only occur under canopies, steep north-facing slopes, or along stream banks. And those habitats have been seriously changed and are going to be changed for a long, long time, if not for good.
Did you have data on the rare and endemic plants prior to the wildfires in these locations?
Ha! That's an excellent question.
No?
Good
That would be a
question.
no.
No, I did have some data. We'll get
Probably
there.
some.
I'm answering that in a minute, because that's part of my talk. So these are the study sites that I collected. Those two forests burned big time in 2012. The Whitewater Baldy Fire almost burned 300,000 acres. In 2012, which was then followed last year with the Silver Fire, which burned almost 140,000 acres. The Gila is a hot spot of endemism, has 19 plant species of concern, which means those are all species that are only known from the Gila or in the general Mogollon Rim area. The Lincoln National Forest is our most diverse spot or high elevation spot when it comes to rare plants. There are 27 species of concern, or plants that primarily occur in the Lincoln National Forest. And then there's this really cute little cactus. This is Lee's pincushion cactus. It's primarily only known from within the perimeter of Carlsbad Caverns National Park. And a lot of that park burned. Over half of it burned since 2010. And again, nobody really knew how these cacti fared through the fire. And I'm not going to talk a whole lot about the cactus, but basically I set up monitoring plots in the burned areas and in the unburned areas to see if the cactus comes back in the burned areas where there used to be cacti. And if they do, is it the same or similar rate as in unburned areas? And if there's a difference between burned and unburned. So it's the beginning of a long-term study. Mm-hmm. This is existing data. So I'm going to talk primarily about the Gila National Forest and endemic plants there, because that was the most interesting site to me because of the nature of their rare plants. All of these dots on that map represent rare plant sites. The different colors and different shape is representative of different species of rare plants. So again, there's 19 plant species of concern in the Gila that were documented from 158 sites. These sites are primarily what I call historic, from the specimen record. So all these plants most all of those plants, there's a specimen in a herbarium somewhere in New Mexico. So they were collected there somewhere before the age of GPS. So we really only have relatively vague locational information. So they might say, they give you a township section range. They may say along a trail. They may say 5 miles north of Mogollon or something. So they can be very vague. But there's no information on abundance, the number of, or the true distribution of them. That's all we know. So we know that one plant is known from only 5 sites, but we don't know whether that means the plant is all over the place out there, or does it only occur at these 5 sites? We have no knowledge. But these are the sites that I try to relocate. So all of the brown, yellow, and orange polygons in there is all fire scars from fires that burned since 2002, between 2000 and 2013. That's over 1 million acres that have burned in 13 years in the Gila National Forest. And you can see, actually, that for some reason, the majority of known rare plant sites in Gila National Forest is within that whitewater baldy fire. That's that big orange polygon there. And then, unfortunately, this is the silver fire, this yellow one. That's the other hot spot for rare plants in Gila. It burned last year. And I worked in the silver fire this summer, but today I'm only going to talk what I found in the whitewater baldy perimeter. Again, it's nearly 300,000 acres of burned forest, most of it severely burned, places just completely nuked. It was very spectacular to work there. So 44% of all of the known rare plant sites in the entire Gila National Forest were within the whitewater baldy fire. And then you can see, of course, there's a few sites that are outside the 2012 fire, but they all burned in 2006, including that area, so it's also nuked. Some of these plants had their entire range, their entire known range burned. So we do not know that these plants occur anywhere outside of this fire perimeter. So these are the plants that I targeted last year in the Gila National Forest. And I'm going to talk about each one of those. Several of those, again, only occur within the fire perimeter, and others had distribution outside of there. The white dots on this map now represent where I went for this survey in 2013. So each one of those dots actually represents a location where I found a rare plant. But it also really nicely traces my treks through the Gila National Forest. And I have to say, I don't know what I was thinking when I proposed this project, because I was just thinking rare plants, but I never thought about what it would take to actually locate them in a burned area. Because this is exactly what it looks like out there. It's almost impossible to get through there. It's very dangerous. I had just amazing experiences with all of these hazards. I was dodging a lot of flash floods and loose rocks and falling trees and washed out roads and disappeared trails and hail and lightning and you name it. Here in this particular place here, I backpacked in and did a base camp, and then I walked from there until I lost the trail, which is right there where my last white dot is, where I then just stood in the forest and nothing but burned forest, as far as the eye could see. And you know that when you look at your GPS and you doubt your GPS or your compass, you know it's time to turn around. It's not worth it to get lost out there. So it just so changes a place so 100% that it's very easy to get disoriented, and the trails either wash out or completely obscured. A lot of times they drop large quantities of straw out there for slope stabilization that wipes out the trails, or you get massive quantities of aspen coming in, which is totally disorienting. Aspen is one of the happiest plants out after the fires now. And so here are the plants that I was working on at up in the Gila. The most interesting one to me is Gooding's onion. So Gooding's onion is actually a rare plant that has a relatively wide distribution for a rare plant. This plant occurs in the Gila National Forest and the adjacent Apache sitgraves forest, and this is where the center of its population are. Most all known sites are in these two national forests. The plant occurs at higher elevations, above 8,000 feet, shady sites, creek bottoms or the bottoms of washes, wet sites, north-facing slopes. It also has a population in the Lincoln National Forest, a small population on the Navajo Nation, and a small population on the Coronado. And you'd think, wow, that's a pretty wide distribution. But it turns out that 94% of all the known sites, and there was lots of them, they all burned in 3 different fires between 2011 and 2012. So they all burned in the Lincoln, they all burned in the Gila, and they burned in the Apache sitgraves in 3 different fires. That is very unusual. You would just not expect this to happen. It was a candidate for listing under the Endangered Species Act, but they drafted a conservation agreement to protect the plant from any kind of management actions that could have an adverse impact on the plants. They drafted that document between the Forest Service and the Fish and Wildlife Service, and once they got it, nothing was ever done with the plant again. That was in 1997. So here was our one chance to actually have some pre-fire data, and our data is from 1997. So we have some data, but it goes back to 1997 in terms of how many plants were at each of those sites. So back before 97, they actually put a lot of effort into trying to find this plant to keep it from getting listed. So we have data, but it's old data. So there's 25 known sites in the Gila National Forest, and 13 of those were just in the Whitewater Baldy perimeter. But there's other sites that were in previous fires in the Gila from 2006 as well. And then, of course, those other sites in Arizona. And by chance, somebody went and did a study on Allium gardenia in 2012, which coincided with the fire. She visited 20 sites, and 8 of those were in the Whitewater Baldy perimeter. So we have actually data from immediately after the fire, like within 3 months after the fire. And then I went back in 2013, and this is some of the data we found. And I guess what I want to say, the orange highlighted lines here are those that I visited and she visited in 2012. That I visited in 2013 and she visited in 2012. And you can see I found plants wherever she found plants. So she found them in 2012 and I found them in 2013. But note how much fewer plants there are in 2013 over 2012 in those same areas. Immediately after the fire, 1 year after the fire. And again, there's serious habitat alteration going on. And then I want to point out here, she also went to sites that burned in 2006. And you can see she almost found plants in none of those sites. She found plants in one of the sites, but that had only a light burn. So this is why I'm suspecting that we might lose plants that are really adapted to cool, shady, north-facing sites. Or another big lesson that I learned, it's really not the fire that is impacting the plants, but what happens after the fire. Mm-hmm. What happens after the fire is huge. This is classic habitat condition that I find in all of those burned areas. You can see that this has a serious impact on the water table, of course. Some of these tiny, tiny little creeks, if they even flow year-round, some of them have incised 6 feet or deeper. The top is just completely scoured off. That takes all of the seed bank and all of the plants. These are actually some Allium gardenias right here that are hanging on because they were protected by those few left trees standing right behind it. But everything else was gone there. And this is a really common occurrence where you get 6-foot deposits of debris coming down from the top and just covering everything. And this is not burned. This is below the burn. This is all the stuff that washes down from the top. And so, of course, that covers all of the habitat. And those plants, I seriously doubt would come back. So if we did lose plants, it's directly associated with the conversion of the habitat. This is the Mogollon death camas, which is a very beautiful plant. And it is endemic to the Mogollons, and it was only known from 5 sites above 8,700 feet. And again, that was where it was collected, so we didn't have any idea about abundance of the plant. But it grows in the understory of mixed conifer forests in the Mogollons. All of those sites burned in 2012, but I was actually able to find quite a few of those plants in the right places above a certain altitude. But again, I don't know how this plant will persist once it realizes that the canopy is gone. And I was actually working with a volunteer this summer from Silver City, and he just went out and collected a bunch of seeds from those sites that we're going to send up to Colorado to put into a seed bank in case they disappear, because at this point we don't know any of these plants existing in an unburned forest. But for now it lives on, and it was doing pretty well 1 year after the fire. But again, I don't know how this plant was distributed or how abundant it was before the fire. I don't think those are new plants, but I just don't have any data. This plant is only known from 3 rock outcrops in the Gila wilderness. It could be, I mean, above 9,500 feet, so it's pretty limited habitat, and it's only those rock outcrops. It's only known from 3 rock outcrops. I would guess it might be in more rock outcrops, but we don't know. This plant likely is just disappeared back into the wilderness because that place is largely inaccessible now. But because of its habitat, the fire intensity in those rock outcrops was not likely as bad as underneath the canopy or in the forest. So I still did find plants in those couple of rock outcrops that I could find, that I could go to. And so I assume that this plant actually will live on in obscurity now, but of course in a habitat like this it could also be seriously impacted by climate change and drought. The Gila thistle is a thistle or cirsium that is endemic to the Gila National Forest, so it is only known to occur in that area, but nobody collects thistles. So this was actually only known in the specimen record from 2 sites. So surely it appears to be a rare plant if you just go with the specimen record. But as I was working in the Gila, I find it everywhere. Not only did I find it everywhere, but it actually benefited from the fire. Some hikers were up on this trail, on this ridge, and they came back and they reported this big invasive species, this thistle everywhere, and they thought it had come in potentially with their seed drops and stuff. But I went up there and it was the Gila thistle, and it was just really benefiting from the opening up of the canopy and the added nitrogen into the soil. So that was that's the only truly very happy plant that I found. Although I have to say that within a year of the fires, the plants, the herbaceous plants, are actually very, very exuberant from that added nitrogen. I think that goes on for a couple of years, and then things sort themselves out and will look different. And that's what I saw in the fire scars from 2006 fires. And then there's the heartleaf groundsel. This is a plant that I think was also underdocumented. But all of the known sites, which was 10 of them, burned in the Whitewater Baldy fire. It's only known above 8,000 feet. And again, it's almost completely restricted to north-facing shaded slopes, where you can find it actually regularly above that elevation. But that's all burned. Everything that I saw of that plant had burned habitat. The plants were actually doing really well a year after the fire. Even in this, you see all this grass here, that's all seeded by the Forest Service for erosion control, I guess. So it looks, in a lot of places, it looks like a golf course out there. But some of those native plants and rare plants are hanging on and keep and doing fairly well still, but I don't know if that's going to stay that way. I'd like to go back and repeat the study 5 years from now, but I suspect when all those trees are falling, it's even going to be harder to get into some of those areas. But for now, it lives on, but that's another one that I want to actually collect some seeds to
This is
keep.
not a senecio?
It's a senecio. Yeah, it's now Pacara. But it used to be senecio.
Oh,
And the Mogollon hawkweed was a very mysterious plant. Still is kind of a mysterious plant, but previously it was only known from 3 sites, and I knew that 2 of them had burned in 2012, and the 3rd one burned in 2006, so all of them had burned. But it turns out it actually grows in these underneath open canopies in ponderosa pine forest or in meadow type situations. So I actually found it in 5 sites in 2013, so we actually found more sites than previously known, and I think this one has been overlooked because it's not a very showy plant, obviously. And and the 2 sites that I could reach inside of the 2012 fire, all the plants were okay. One site I couldn't get to because it got turned around in the forest. But I think this one is doing okay because of its habitat. So, you know, one wonders what you can do with these huge wildfires. How can you protect these plants? Where do we go from here? Is there anything we can do? And these are some of the points that I came up with. You know, of course, there's always prescribed fires, especially in those areas like the ponderosa pine forest that are adapted habitats to fire. And we should consider prescribed burns and fires, not just in the urban interface, but also maybe for rare plant management. That's kind of a wishful thinking. And then, of course, I think land management agencies need to be really made aware of the impacts that firefighting has on these fires, especially populations that are known along the road. There can be roads or streams that can be easily avoided by just a little bit of education during and after the fire. We actually, the biggest damage is from post-fire activities. One of our Holy Ghost Ipomopsis introduced population was impacted by thinning activities, not by the fire. Fire didn't even come near there, but it was near a road, and the Forest Service decided they were going to thin in case the fire would come, or maybe because they needed some busy work. But there were, I don't know how it happened. They knew where the population was, but they just went up there and they thinned it, and that crashed one of our introduced populations. So because there is no botanists in the agencies, for the most part in New Mexico, the awareness level in the agencies about where their sensitive species occurs is like way down, way down. So that could be improved quite a bit. And then again, add the sensitive species habitat to their priority list for treatment. And then my biggest pet peeve with rare plants is that we don't even have bare bottom baseline information about the actual even distribution of these plants. All of our knowledge comes from coincidental collections, specimen record. The forests and the BLM, they do not collect baseline information on where their rare plants occur. And then you can, once you know that, or at the same time, you can assess how vulnerable a place is to fires, and then prioritize your potential restoration or prescribed fire activities, create some kind of a priority list. And again, stock up on seed banks. All of our plants that are that rare, they should have their seeds stored somewhere in case we lose the entire population, which is entirely possible.
Does New Mexico have a seed bank? You mentioned Colorado having one.
No.
New Mexico doesn't?
No. The botanical garden the Desert Botanical Garden in Phoenix is directly linked with seed banking through the Center for Plant Conservation, as well as the Denver Botanical Garden, but not the Rio Grande Botanical Garden.
That would be a good job for the new president of Native Plant Society, Taos Chapter.
I think it came up a number of years ago, but I don't know why they're not involved with a lot of conservation projects. And then again, do some monitoring, and I'll find out what's going on with the rare plants in the forest. And there is just largely a great lack of information on rare plants, which is based on priorities within the land management agencies. Okay.
Wow.
That's it.
Can
Is there
we,
any
as
questions?
hikers, et cetera, out in the mountains and stuff, can we use our phones and take pictures of plants and try to do a GPS? And
Well, you know,
does that ever help, or does that just get confusing?
no. No. I don't really have a great rush towards that, but I've been trying to establish a citizen science or volunteer program that I've variously published in the Native Plant Society newsletter, what I call a treasure hunt. We have like 200 rare plant species in New Mexico, the majority of which we only have anecdotal or historical information, no GPS information. So we have approximate locations where they were once documented. Most of them were documented before the early 90s.
Okay.
So we don't have any information for the last 20 years. So I've been going out with some groups to show them how to provide them with all the known information for this plant, which oftentimes is not a lot. But we have approximate locations, information on those locations, and maps. Try to find that population, and then first of all get a GPS coordinate to actually get 21st century locations, so somebody could always go back. Try to count them, how many are there, and then fill out a data sheet, and is there any threats to it, and what are the associated species, is there any weeds. And so this could be one species that a person is interested in, or a group of persons is interested in. It could be an area, like you want to know where all the rare plants are on your mountain, or in your county, in your neighborhood park, if there are any. And
Are there a lot of rare plants in Taos area?
there's not a lot of rare plants in the Taos area, but next summer I'm going to lead a field trip for you guys to find brand new described species, was just described this year from a trail up to Wheeler.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have a photo of that plant. We don't know what it looks like. There's not even a collection at this point in New Mexico herbaria, but we probably have a GPS location, which is really good. So we could, this could be, for example, a training on what that would look like. Go out and try and find a rare plant and find out, is it actually rare? Is this plant rare, or is it all over the mountain? It's just been overlooked because it's just a draba.
Okay. When do you think you'll be doing that?
I think it's planned for the end of July or beginning of August.
Okay. So put that on your list.
And there's some rare plants here in the Taos area. We did a little training at a ranch near Tres Piedras. There's a rare plant there that only occurs in that area, where people are starting to document that one. The small-headed golden weed.
Okay.
So there's a few plants, and if you go to the rare plant website, you can actually do a search by county and just search Taos County, and it will give you a list of plants considered rare in the county.
I think it'd be cool if we published that on our website, so that if you were going out to hike, what do you guys think? Kim, you'll take that on as a project? Thank you, honey. Appreciate it. No problem.
Well, then some plants are actually fairly charismatic, like the Ipomopsis, the Holy Ghost Ipomopsis, is not that difficult to identify, and I just do not believe that plant could possibly only occur along a roadside.
One space.
So, sometimes it's just being aware when you walk out there to see something unusual, or maybe, wow, there's a pink flowering Ipomopsis. I better take a
That's always
picture.
going to get my attention.
Take a picture and send it to Daniela, and take a
Yeah.
GPS coordinate if
Yeah.
you can. Because we really know very little about the distribution of our rare plants, and oftentimes when you really go out and look, you find the plant more common than previously thought.
So is it okay with you if we post your email address on our website, on our chapter page?
For reference to, yeah.
To send you pictures.
Oh, yeah, go
Okay.
ahead.
Is
I
that
get
right?
that all the time.
Love letters, whatever you guys want to do.
Those don't come so often, but
Yeah, but the pictures, that's like a- Any more questions?
Well, the other thing too is is the native plant listserv, where
True.
people can post
True.
pictures and ask questions, if they don't recognize it.
Do you get on the listserv a lot?
I'm on the listserv, and there's also a rare plant listserv.
There's-
I was actually just thinking, yeah, there is a rare plant listserv, and you can sign up on that one through the rare plant website.
Okay.
Yeah, and I was actually just thinking that maybe I should plant like rare plant pictures on the listserv every once in a while too.
It's a good idea.
Yeah,
Because the part of the issue is really recognizing.
and just creating awareness that there's rare plants. This is what they look like, and
But
just get a little blip of what I know about them.
Facebook and things like that, it has really helped people get to know plants.
Yeah.
I tried a couple of things where I found things in my garden and I said, identify this, but nobody jumped at it. Come on, you guys, jump, a little jump, So, wonderful. This was great.
So many rare plants, so few people looking for them.
This is where technology is going to be our advantage. It really is.
Yeah,
Thank you,
I need a
Daniela.
drone, a survey drone.
Oh, you need a survey drone. That's a good idea. Oh, I never thought of that.
Yeah.
That's a really good idea.
It's kind of hard on the body climbing around those places.
And I looked at your elevations and I'm like, oh my God, she spends all of her time in that rarefied air.
Thin air up there.